And your inventory is water. I grew up surrounded by water.
Bounty hunters. We don't need that scum.
Yes, sir.
Those rebels won't escape us.
I grew up surrounded by
That scum.
There will be a substantial reward for the one who finds the Millennium Falcon.
I grew up surrounded by
Reward. You are free to use any methods necessary, but I want them alive. No disintegrations.
As you wish.
I grew up surrounded by
Disintegrations. Where are those transmissions you intercepted? What have you done with those plans?
I grew up surrounded by
Plans.
Hey! Why, you slimy, double-crossing, no-good swindler.
I grew up surrounded by
Swindler. You got a lot of guts coming here. After what you pulled.
I grew up surrounded by
What you pulled. How you doing, you old pirate? So good to see you,
I grew up surrounded by
old pirate. What are you doing here?
Repairs. I thought you could help me out.
I grew up surrounded by
Repairs.
And how you doing, Chewbacca? Still hanging around with this loser?
I grew up surrounded by
This loser?
Oh, nice to see a familiar face. Ichuta. How rude.
I grew up surrounded by
Ichuta.
We would be honored if you would join us.
I grew up surrounded by
Honored.
I had no choice. They arrived right before you did.
I grew up surrounded by
No choice.
I grew up surrounded by
You may take Captain Solo to Jabba the Hutt after I have Skywalker.
I grew up surrounded by
Jabba the Hutt.
Look, Jabba, next time you want to talk to me, come see me yourself. Don't send one of these twerps.
I grew up surrounded by
Twerps. Look, Jabba, even I get boarded sometimes.
I grew up surrounded by
But I got a nice, easy charter, and I'll pay you back, plus a little extra. I just need a little more time.
I grew up surrounded by
A little extra.
Isbong chikoh panagring na miloto bunky dongo. La choda,
I grew up surrounded by
la choda.
Lord Vader, what about Leia and the Wookiee?
I grew up surrounded by
What about... You're being put into carbon freeze.
What if he doesn't survive? He's worth a lot to me.
I grew up surrounded by
Carbon freeze. Yes, he's alive. And in perfect hibernation.
He's all yours, bounty hunter.
I grew up surrounded by
Perfect hibernation.
Put Captain Solo in the cargo hold.
I grew up surrounded by
Cargo hold.
It would be unfortunate if I had to leave the garrison here.
This deal is getting worse all the time.
I grew up surrounded by
Worse all the time.
Yuba, Colorado Kamawalpa. Yes, Kachong. Kawawoki.
I grew up surrounded by
Kamawalpa.
Yotto.
Because he's holding a thermal detonator.
I grew up surrounded by
Yotto.
Kasoyari kui rado kankiku. Yubang chongaripa.
I grew up surrounded by
Kankiku.
Yotto.
He agrees.
I grew up surrounded by
He agrees.
You have hibernation sickness.
I grew up surrounded by
Sickness.
Where am I?
Jabba's palace.
I grew up surrounded by
Jabba's palace.
Who are you?
Someone who loves you.
I grew up surrounded by
Who are you?
I know that laugh.
I grew up surrounded by
It's not my fault.
Chicago, you need solo.
I grew up surrounded by
Not my fault.
King Sari Kapah Magna Miskachata. We now
I grew up surrounded by
Jedi mode spion go eat. Jedi mind.
I grew up surrounded by
A Jedi Knight? I'm out of it for a little while. Everybody gets illusions of grandeur.
I grew up surrounded by
Illusions of grandeur.
You will bring Captain Solo and the Wookiee to me.
I grew up surrounded by
That laugh.
You will therefore be taken to the Dune Sea and cast into the pit of Carkoon, the nesting place of the all-powerful Sarlacc.
I grew up surrounded by
The all-powerful Sarlacc. In his belly you will find a new definition of pain and suffering, as you are slowly digested over 1,000 years.
I grew up surrounded by
Pain and suffering.
I grew up surrounded by
Tell that slimy piece of worm-ridden filth he'll get no such pleasure from us.
I grew up surrounded by
Slimy piece of worm.
I grew up surrounded by
Watch out!